Hi everyone. My name is Sterba, and I'm going to give this talk when El Cerrito went insane, the Ouija incident of 1920. I gave this talk a couple weeks ago for the annual meeting of the El Cerrito Historical Society. It was on January 29th, 2023. Had a couple of technical glitches, so I'm just re-recording this as a Zoom meeting, but basically I'll cover everything I did in the talk. So yeah, I'm a academic historian. I teach at San Francisco State. And usually, when we discuss events, when I discuss them in class or whatever in research, I'm usually talking about big events, things that take place over a considerable amount of time. And not only that, more importantly, had a major impact years, decades down the road, events like the Civil War or the New Deal or something. But in this case, the story I'm going to tell you today, it's a flash in the pan. It came out of nowhere. It caught and made national headlines for about a week and then completely disappeared. So flash in the pan, yeah, but in a way, these kind of stories serve kind of like a flash bulb going off, where this one moment can illuminate a lot about what's going on. In this case, not just about the city of El Cerrito, California, but nationally, where's the country culturally, socially, politically, and so on. So I'm going to tell a story, which is a bizarre story, and I hope folks don't get nightmares. But then, try to put it in kind of a larger context, touch on some big themes that we can get a sense of where America was in 1920. So yeah, obviously the Ouija Mania revolves around this device, and I'll be going to, discussing how it was used, how we use it today, but more importantly, how did it function back then, especially for the people who were involved. So let's take a look. I'm going to go to a PowerPoint now. Yeah, so this is the talk I gave when El Cerrito went insane. So, yeah, it's a very strange episode. Basically, what happened was on March 3rd, 1920, in the afternoon, it was a Wednesday, neighbors were getting concerned about what was going on in this house. It located on San Pablo Avenue at the corner of Potrero and El Cerrito. The curtains had been drawn, the doors closed. No one had been seen coming in and out of it for days. And there were rumors circulating that were getting very concerning, that small children and maybe even adults were being kept in there against their will. There were seances, maybe even orgies going on. It got to the point where neighbors asked a local marshal to go to that house, again on that day, March 3rd, and try to find out what was happening. He went to the door. They wouldn't open the door, the occupants, and they said he couldn't come in, that they were conducting the Passion Play. It was almost Easter, or coming to Easter, and they wouldn't let him in, the local marshal. So he went to the Richmond Police Department, and the chief of police, 6 patrolmen, brought the police wagon there and came with a Roman Catholic priest. And they knocked on the door trying to get admittance. Now, there's a little bit of discrepancy in the various news stories that came out about what happened next. Most of the papers said that the police broke the door down and went inside and arrested the adults in the building. Other accounts say that the Catholic priest was able to persuade the people to open the door, but once they saw the police, there was a scuffle and so fighting broke out. In any case, what they found inside, pretty much everybody can agree. They found 12 people, 7 adults and 5 children, the children as young as 2 years old, in this house. They were pale. They looked emaciated, but most of all, many of them were completely obsessed with what the spirit world and their communications through the Ouija board were telling them. It said that in that case, they weren't even that upset about the police raid. They were more upset that it interrupted their what they were hoping for was a major communication from the spirit world at 5 that was coming at 5 p.m., but the police came and interrupted that. So they're really out there, right? Now, yeah, so it all happened in this kind of humble looking building. So what happened in the wake of that, the 7 adults were arrested. They were a danger to themselves and to others. And they obviously needed to be evaluated psychiatrically. The children were also taken under custody. The 2 teenagers were, and then the other children were put in with other families to be taken care of while their parents were in jail. Right? The other thing that happened was that the press got a hold of this. The event happened again on March 3rd. By the next day, the wire services were carrying this story to hundreds of papers across the country. Within 2 days, it was appearing as news stories. Again, all through the country. 71 stories appeared just in the state of Nebraska alone. So obviously, it just caught fire. And the other thing that happened on the day that followed was that the city had a mass meeting, and what was called the State Commission in Lunacy, which was the mental health division then of the state, determined that every single resident, or they announced that every single resident in El Cerrito, which was about 1,500 people, would have to be psychiatrically evaluated, every individual, because of the fears that this was much more widespread than just this one episode. So, wow, right? Pretty crazy stuff. Well, and I'll just give another slide here. It gives you an idea of the range of the ages, the different families that were involved, all Italian-American, either born in Italy or born here in the States. And as you can see, I outlined Maria Morrow at the center of it, as we'll see. But the 3 other women in bold and underline, they were would be placed in mental asylums for several weeks to be evaluated. They were completely convinced that they were not only in communication with the spirit world, but it was threatening their lives. Okay, so quite a scene here. How did we get to this point? What caused all this? Well, I guess it really begins with a family. And here's just the wire services even carried or created this cartoon of events in El Cerrito for newspapers if they wanted to print or not. So really heavy, intense, the short-lived coverage. Well, yeah, again, how did this start? Well, it starts in a family tragedy. The Morrow family suffered 2 terrible events in less than a year before this Ouija board police raid, right? The Morrow family were well established in El Cerrito. Maria, the mother, and Nazaro, or Edward Morrow, the husband, had settled in the area, had been in their home in the area for a couple of decades. As you see just from that clipping on the left, her husband Nazaro was prominent local figure, one of the pioneers of the region settling in. He was a plumber by trade. He built a very successful business, but it also included a supply store that they ran out of their home. He and Maria were really kind of about to enjoy their golden years, right? They're both in their mid to late 50s. They had two daughters, and who live right there. And it was they're doing well in the States. They'd made the move to America very successfully. Well, he dies of a heart attack suddenly. Again, if you look at the date, that's just a little bit less than a year before the Ouija board incident. He dies of a heart attack. But even worse, their younger daughter, just less than 8-9 months later, was killed on the day after Christmas, also in 1919. She was hit by it was a hit and run accident. And the story was she was taking a Christmas present to a friend, and just outside her door was what was served as sort of a highway then, San Pablo Avenue. She was hit by the car. Reports said that she dragged herself about 50 feet. The blood left a trail on the ground, and collapsed in a ditch right off the road, and died soon after. It was a hit and run. There were 3 people on the street at that time. They saw the accident. They ran over to help her. They thought that the car would stop. The car sort of slowed down, but then drove off. So they didn't get the plate. They were too concerned with, taking care of her. They just assumed the car would stop and help them bring the woman to the hospital. It didn't. It drove off. And they couldn't identify the driver. They couldn't identify the license plate or anything. She dies. It's a total tragedy, both events. And it leaves the mother, Maria Morrow, by herself, again, just a year before, expecting to retire, have grandchildren, whatever, Yeah, here's the notices. They were prominent in the larger Italian community. There was a San Francisco Italian language paper, and it carried both notices of their deaths, Eugenia and Nazaro. So, I think all we can do is, we don't know too much about the mother who survived, Maria Morrow, but I don't know if she was a particularly religious person or what, but she obviously was shaken. You can't imagine her feelings at this time. It was at this time, I don't know if she consulted her church or if she was even church going, but she did start consulting the Ouija board. And the idea, her main intent at that time, was to contact the spirit world to find out who the driver was. She wanted justice. She wanted some kind of closure, to use a modern term, to this event. And she started consulting the Ouija board. Because despite all it was a very prominent event at that time. And the police, you can see entire Richmond force looking for the killer. They couldn't find it. So she, religion or the law couldn't bring justice or solace to her. Her daughter owned a Ouija board in the house. Maybe they'd used it at times, maybe even in the wake of the father's death. Anyway, that's what Maria started to do to find out who the driver was, the killer, the accidental killer. So it wasn't just Maria on her own. Here's another picture of that home, and actually you can see Maria in the doorway, and she had an older daughter and a younger daughter. This is Eugenia, who would die in the car accident. But Maria went to her daughter, who had been married, was the Soldavini family, and a neighbor. This is the Bottinis, and this was just you can't tell, but they were neighbors, neighboring houses. So together, these family members started to do some form of Ouija board seances, and they actually came up with a license plate number. They went to the police, but the marshal found that the number made no sense. There was no matching record. And at this point, and again, I don't have an exact timeline of how this happened. At this point, the things begin to get out of hand. There's fears that, or there's a sensation that by contacting these spirits to find out the driver, they'd actually unleashed something far more ominous, which was evil spirits. And evil spirits started to make demands on them through the board. They started to ask, and this is where all the strange behavior starts to happen. So we have, again, we have Eugenia's death, the car accident in late December 1919. In the next 2 months, January and February, you get this intense obsession with, and then fear of what's been unleashed by these seances, this evil spirit. And the evil spirit's asking them to do things like bring small children into the house, because somehow small children will aid in the communications by just their presence. And then really strange things happen, like the request that they cut off the hair of the children, that they burn the hair, that they burn money. And the reports range from just a few dollars to $700 being burned, furniture being broken and burned, clothes being torn off to some of the teenagers that are in the house, and 24-hour seances with no eating, people unable to eat or sleep. The worst kind of bizarre thing was the women reported later, Maria Morrow would say that there was a hole dug in the ground, mysteriously appeared, the size of a grave in her yard. And it was believed that the good spirits were coming out through there. I'm sorry, the bad spirits were coming up through the hole, and somehow they had to get the good spirits to go force them back down into the hole. So things get really out of hand. Like I said, it's the women after the raid. There's evaluations, and the 4 women, the 3 men are released, but the 4 women are deemed that they've gone insane. They have to be put in mental asylums. They're separated so that they won't keep talking to each other. And again, they are considered, maybe just the tip of the iceberg in this town. So that maybe 1,500 other people need to be evaluated to see if they've caught some contagion, right? Yeah, so these are the women, 3 of them anyway. The Susie Bottini is not pictured here. We don't get too many quotes. I haven't yet found any kind of testimonials or anything like that, but the papers did quote them a little bit. So I just want to share those quotations. First of all, this is Maria Morrow, the mother, the 55-year-old mother and wife of, that experienced those 2 deaths, the tragedies. She admitted that she says, I cannot use the board, but others have, and I believe what they say. So Maria herself isn't the sort of medium. She's not channeling it, but she believes completely in what's happening. Her older daughter, who had married and survived, was also quoted, and she said, she gives a little bit of information. My sister Jenny, the woman who was killed in the car accident, had used the Ouija board in talking with my father, and I was talking to her. We heard strange sounds and voices. So Josie Soldavini was younger, and she apparently could communicate somewhat with the spirits on this. Really, though, the person who becomes the main figure was not a relation, but one of the neighbors, and it's a 15-year-old girl named Adeline Bottini, and she becomes the main conduit of the spirits. She was quoted as saying, "I've been in a trance for some time, and I know what the Ouija board tells me is true." And she gives a reason why they were doing all these things. We cut my sister Rosie's hair, who was also in the house, because we were told she would die otherwise. From what I can tell, nearly all of the messaging is coming through through Adeline. I don't know if people are familiar with the Salem witch trials, but there's something obviously comes to mind, and this is a comparison that was made a lot in the press at the time, that like Salem, it was the adolescent or teenage girls involved who become the center of all the sort of revelations and demands of the devil, in Salem's case, or this evil spirits here in El Cerrito. If you notice a couple of these pictures, that like she's wearing this big hat. Part of that is to cover the fact that her hair has been sheared. She's one of the people that also got her hair sheared off. So what's just the responses? They come from various sources. Obviously, I've given a sense of the press coverage. Here's just a few of the headlines. They range, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Sheboygan, Wisconsin, Omaha, and again, Nebraska for some reason, especially heavy. I don't have a definitive number. I just use a search engine, and I found all these different papers carried the story. But also not just sort of small papers using the wire service. The Chicago Daily Tribune is one of the major papers of the country. So it's appearing all over the states. Here's probably one of the better, more graphics involved appeared in Oakland, just a little bit away from us, a few miles away. And the Tribune there carried, again, a picture of the home and the people that were involved. This is the younger daughter Rosie, and again, her wearing this hat to cover her hair being cut off. But another child was also kind of kept in the house as part of these events. And you notice this appeared just one day after the event, and within a day or two, it's all over the country. So the press definitely had responded very dramatically. Public officials did too. Calls almost came immediately to ban it, to prohibit the sale and use of Ouija boards. This is only a year after Prohibition, so the idea of preventing the sale and usage of something, in that case of alcohol, is kind of okay. This is a strategy we can employ here. This gentleman here, I know he looks like he could be the evil spirit, but no, he was a California assemblyman. He called it the Ouija board, using the Ouija board, he called it as bad as the drug habit. He said the state legislatures or Congress should act before the craze becomes worse. the best thing to do would be to step in and prohibit the sale of Ouija boards altogether. So this is the California State Assembly. This legislation was considered. It was never passed. But there was all agitation for this. The Oakland City Council wanted it banned. Definitely in El Cerrito, they wanted it banned. So the public officials are having to deal with this, and do, and some try to make some mileage out of it, right? The church too. These are local ministers responding, but you had in the papers, you had people, clergy in New York commenting on this too, on this event as emblematic of something going on, mainly that we're becoming irreligious, we're becoming too secular. It's dangerous the way the country's turning. This one minister from Berkeley, nearby Berkeley, calls it a device of the devil. He says, under the term lying wonders, it is condemned in the scriptures. So Ouija board. It is extremely dangerous for one to go to the Ouija, even in a spirit of idle curiosity. And more specifically about El Cerrito, some of these clergy said, well, it comes as no surprise that it would happen in El Cerrito. El Cerrito had one church and sort of the beginnings of a Methodist mission there, but only one small church in the whole the community. He called it this Kaufman called it the churchless town. El Cerrito is almost forgotten and well nigh forsaken by the organized Christian churches. If you know anything about El Cerrito's history, in about 10 years, it's going to be Sin City. But at this time, it wasn't yet, a bastion for booze and gambling that it would become. But, this Kaufman's on the ball, right? He's calling us kind of a town that has no religion, and there's no surprise that something like this would happen. Then there's the experts. And again, when I say the State Commission on Lunacy, can people, if you can see that. Yeah, it was a real, this is what the Department of Mental Health, sort of was called at the time. These are the folks that would come, they'd have a board would meet. After the initial announcement that the whole town would need to be evaluated, they felt they talked to various people and felt that didn't need to be that didn't need to happen. That this was pretty much a local, case that only involved a few families. But what we do get out of this is a lot of the news stories would go to experts and local psychiatrists, psychologists, and what were called alienists. And one of them, just quoting one here, I love this quote: Ouija phenomena may occur in a perfectly normal or so-called normal man. Right? And again, this sort of reference the idea that, somebody might appear normal on the outside, but actually be, obsessed with Ouija and believing in sort of an occult world. And the reference again to sort of Salem or medieval Europe. In earlier days, whole villages had become afflicted with a religious frenzy. The El Cerrito Ouija manifestations appear to have been similar. So we have responses from politicians, press, clergy, and psychiatric medical experts, all drawn by this one event. So just giving a feel for how. Now, what's interesting is when you look in the news stories, a lot of the news stories, I saw one for Spokane, Washington. It would not only report on El Cerrito, but it also had, editors would not only choose, hey, my readers will like this in Spokane, but or Omaha or Tuscaloosa or whatever. But a lot of the papers say, well, you know what? How about I send a reporter to find out, do we have a Ouija problem? Is there a Ouija issue here? So a lot of these papers then would sort of explore and talk to, again, sort of this range of experts about, is it a problem in our community too? And some of them, like in Spokane, said, yes, it's a big problem. So yeah, different ways this resonated throughout the country, not just the local community. Okay. Yeah. So, I want to just pull back then to sort of think of this in larger terms. Just make a few points. This first of all, I want to point out that Ouija was a national craze. It was not simply a El Cerrito thing. This is the cover of the Saturday Evening Post, an illustration done by the legendary Norman Rockwell. It appeared just very shortly after the events in El Cerrito, right? I have no idea if he'd heard of that, but this illustration kind of captures, I think, how most people have used the Ouija board. At least for myself, I can say. We have this couple, and most likely he's asking her, do you love me, or will you marry me, or something like that, sort of the romantic. And I can say for myself, I never was into the Ouija board, but if there's one thing I probably used it for was to answer the question, does she like me, when I was 9 years old or 10 years old. So I can't speak for everybody listening, but I think it was the use of the Ouija board is kind of on often, or maybe most of the times, on that sort of level. And Norman Rockwell caught that in this picture. But at the time, and I just give you an idea, so a lot of people, the popularity at the time, not only does it appear on the cover of Saturday Evening Post, one of the major magazines, here's just a local advertisement. This was the major department store in Oakland, and you can see over here, new in the toy shop, are Ouija boards. So it's, hundreds of thousands of these are being sold. Now, I'm not going to go into the history of the Ouija board, but it's important to know something of the origins. There's no ancient roots to this. It did not come out of some exotic, mystical, Mesopotamia or something. It doesn't have these origins. Really, it's just all made up. And it was created in the USA. It came out of really the beginnings, origins of it was after the Civil War, and so many deaths in the country after the war. 1 million people died in the American Civil War. That various sort of clairvoyance and seances became popular, and sort of coalescing these sort of feelings that you could communicate with the spirit world coalesced into the creation of the original board. And you can see it's very different from the one that we are familiar with. But a patent was made, and the creators were, again, it's pure American, creation. The two people, original inventors, were a fertilizer manufacturer who had a warehouse right next to a coffin maker and furniture maker. And those two guys put together and got the permit for this device, came out of that. But the person really who kind of the father, but not the inventor of the Ouija board, was a man named William Fuld. And he was brilliant in selling it, and also getting all the kind of legal patents so that he could control and fight off any competitors. And so he created this, it was really Fuld's company that makes the Ouija board the popular item it is today, still today. So yeah, so it's coming, again, it's a commercial item, it's a toy, it has no basis in any kind of, mystical land or mystical religion or anything. And, again, now the one thing that there are various competitors and competing versions. The Ouija is sort of the brand name, the patented name, but So generically, they were referred to as talking boards. And you can see just a few of the variations. What all of these variations had in common, although they look kind of similar, is they all evoked, again, so this mystical, exotic, um, I don't know, culture that you're tying into. You can see here we have the Mandarin mystery talking board. We have the Swami mystery talking board. We have the Yogi. There's other versions. There's the voodoo version. All of them incredibly racist in their depiction, but all sort of giving the aura that, that it's not science here. It's sort of a mystical entity that you're communing with. They really played that up. And this, again, was part of Fold's genius, right? Okay. Well, now again, I said it before that today we might use it a lot for romance or simple questions and things like that. But back then, a lot of it, much of the usage was, especially in 1920, centered around communing with the dead. And there's good reason for that. The death was much more prevalent in Americans, the average American's life, than it is today, both on a sort of a personal level, and then sort of more broadly what was going on in the country at the time. As you can see, I compared the child mortality in the U.S. And life expectancy between 1920 and 2020. And first of all, the prevalence of child deaths, either infant or up to the age of 5, was much higher. That's over, let's say, 171 deaths out of 1,000 live births. It's almost 20% of every child of all the children born. Now it's, of course, much more reduced. Same with life expectancy. The life expectancy was much lower, 54 years old. If you remember, Morrow was 55 when he died. Today it's 72 years. So just in terms of your family experience, that you were much more frequently confronted with death in the family on a personal level than we are today. But even more so with World War I and the flu epidemic of 1918, people were surrounded or confronting or dealing with death on a much heavier, constant scale than we are currently. Again, the deaths from the World War I, not just for the US, but the world. And the flu epidemic at that time, 675,000 in the US alone, 50 million worldwide, estimated. So part of the Ouija board's phenomenal popularity after World War I, 1918, 1919, 1920, was part of, had the function and the use and the meaning of the Ouija board had was very different from today. It was really much, people were definitely using it to find out if someone liked them or wanted to get married, but just as much, it's not unusual at all for, in this case, Maria Morrow to consult a Ouija board, because that it was part of a larger phenomenon in the States, and we can see from the context of the death that people would consult it in this way of the spirit world for their children, their loved ones that had passed away, and so on. Now, the other thing I just want to touch on is that the 20s, we usually think of it as sort of the roaring 20s, the jazz age, kind of a happy-go-lucky time, kind of gangsters and so on, stock market booming, and but there's and that's true. There's definitely elements of that to the 20s, but at the same time, there's a lot of tension. You could I think of the 1920s as the first real culture war, the phrase we use today, of the modern media era. There was a lot of tensions over immigration. There was a major, sort of the first Red Scare before McCarthyism. There were major race riots across the country, most notably in horrible rioting and killing of African Americans in the streets of Chicago in 1919. What people forget is at least for the first few years as the economy transitioned from World War, there was a major economic depression. So there's a lot of tensions and problems, especially in the year that El Cerrito had its Ouija Mania incident. A lot of, you can just look this picture in the bottom, very infamous photograph. The Ku Klux Klan was more popular than ever to the point where they could have an open march on the streets right in front of the Capitol building in DC. And just a few other issues like teaching of science in schools, evolution in schools. You know, this was not yes, there was the prosperity and a kind of jazz age exuberance, but there's also a lot of tensions in the air. And last, I just want to point out that media was different too. We're just on the verge of radio becoming popular. So broadcasting will completely take over the country and, you know, revolutionize communications and media. But at this point, we still don't even have our first commercial licensed station in California, or even I think Pittsburgh is just a year before, but definitely not in California are people listening to radio. And even tabloid newspapers still haven't taken effect. The New York Daily News starts in 1919. It takes a little while to get really popular. So I guess, you know, we can only imagine how exploited the incident in El Cerrito would have been if there was radio and if there were tabloid newspapers. I just want to point out this headline, the Evening Graphic, New York Evening Graphic, was the worst of them. This is a supposed photograph of when Rudy Valentino died. He apparently went to heaven, and they took a picture of him with Enrico Caruso in heaven. It's an incredible photograph. Again, Rudy meets Caruso in heaven. Somehow we have a photograph of it. I mean, of course, people are taking this tongue in cheek, but this kind of combines everything. He says, look how exploitive you can be, and this idea of exploiting the spirit world to sell newspapers. You know, again, I guess we're fortunate that this type of newspaper wasn't available or wasn't prevalent in 1920 when things happened in El Cerrito. Yeah, just sort of a sense of where the country was on these levels, media, and so on. Now, just to bring it back, sort of getting, be done pretty soon. Getting back to our El Cerrito story. El Cerrito was a very small place at the time of the Ouija board incident. You can see the population. It had not even been called El Cerrito until just a few years before. It was called Rust. It was named after a blacksmith, a German blacksmith named Matthias Rust. And you can see, so these, if you're a local here, you're maybe somewhat familiar with these names, but really this is what would become El Cerrito. It's barely even named that a few years. El Cerrito didn't even have its first paved street until 1921. This isn't exactly 1920, but you can get a sense of how sparse the population is. Of course, in 1940s, all of this would be filled completely with homes, really. But at that time, when the Ouija board incident occurred, there was no police department. Like I said, there was one church and sort of a little Methodist mission started, only one school, and cattle were still being driven down San Pablo Avenue. So you can imagine, this event happening in this small place, but it was picked up and is known nationally. But just to give you an idea where El Cerrito was at the time. And then more closely, I just want to say, and this will be, I'm going to conclude pretty soon, is if you notice from all the names, the Bottinis, the Morrows, the Soldavinis, the Ferreros, it was the people involved in the Ouija Mania incident were exclusively Italian American. And what this is sort of interesting to me. I didn't really know this. I'm from the East Coast, but the Italian American community was very substantial and significant in the El Cerrito population and politics and sort of local affairs. Just a few facts and figures here. Nearly a third of the population was Italian American, either born in Italy or first generation here in the States. You can see from these other, I'm an immigration historian, these next figures show that this is a population that's settled. It's not going really anywhere. This is not a sort of a temporary population that's going to work and then go back to Italy. It's nearly parity, immigrant to US born. It's all, when you go through the census, the manuscript censuses, you see that it's all households, a head of household, a wife or husband, and then like 4 kids. It's not like a boarding house with 12 single men. No, that's not the case. Really have families. And this is probably the most best indication of where the population is. It's almost, like today. The U.S. population as a whole, almost 1-to-1 male to female. And you can see it also in the occupations. We're not talking about laborers just on the railroad, sort of temporary, or in the farms. We're talking about extremely skilled people like Morrow himself, a plumber, or especially small businesses, all types of markets, as you see the pictures here. And even folks who worked in the quarries and the railroads in the area had a pretty good living, So I guess what the point I want to make here is when the press got a hold of this story, there was a lot of Italian prejudice toward Italians at the time. But when the press got a hold of the story, especially in the Bay Area, people didn't indulge in any of the stereotyping or their racism toward Italians. At the time, the idea of the Italian as sort of passionate or almost comical, sort of the stereotyping. You can see this in the ad, the political cartoon that was created by the Associated Press. But what I found is definitely not in the Bay Area. This was never reprinted in the Bay Area. And, we can only speculate, but I think it's because the Italian community, was very important in the area, was there 2-3 decades. And this would be, clearly this is a stereotyping kind of racism. And no paper reprinted it here. The only papers I saw of reprinted were like in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and in sort of Buffalo, New York. But for the most part, and definitely not in the Bay Area, was this kind of stereotyping reprinted. I think what, in the end, even though it was all Italians, I think the incident shows that it's kind of, by using a Ouija board, it's almost a sign of their Americanization rather than because they were Italian, they used the Ouija board. That obviously from what we've seen, it was popular throughout the country, not defined by ethnicity. The boards were sold to all across the country. And there's nothing these Italian families got into the American craze like everyone else. But in this case, obviously tragic circumstances took them to a level that was unique. So just the aftermath. The women, again, only the women were sent to asylums, and part of the reason the men were released was that they could take care of the children. The family member could take care of the children, but they didn't show the symptoms or the obsession that the women did, according to the evaluators anyway. The women were sent to different mental hospitals in Stockton, in Napa. They were separated, but I think even when it's reported, even a couple of days, the doctors who saw them felt that by getting rest, by being separated, so they couldn't keep this going, getting good nutrition, they would be fine. So, but they were hospitalized for 3-4 weeks even. They were released. Most would stay right in the same area. Adeline Bottini, the family would move her out of there, but she would graduate from high school and marry. None of the people changed their names. Obviously, it was probably something that they kept to themselves and felt very powerfully, and maybe with shame, or I don't know. But it wasn't to the extent that they hid themselves from the community or left the area entirely. Most lived and died here in the Bay Area. In the decades that followed. So yeah, so sorry I've gone over quite a bit of time, but I hope you've enjoyed the story. I hope people find this interesting. And again, thanks. I want to just say thank you to you guys for watching, and everybody that attended, and the officers of the El Cerrito Historical Society for inviting me to talk. Thanks again. Bye-bye.